The lawyer cleared his throat before he began reading. My parents had passed within 4 months of each other, both of them gone before I had fully processed the first loss. The grief was still raw. The reading of the will was supposed to be a formality. That was what I told myself on the drive over. I sat in a stiff chair beside my sister Vanessa in Mr. Aldridge's office. He adjusted his glasses, looked down at the document, and read, "My clients have decided to leave the family home, savings, business shares, and all liquid assets to their eldest daughter, Vanessa." I waited. I waited for my name to follow. It never did. Mr. Aldridge paused, then said there was a personal note attached. He read it aloud. "We believe she needs it more. Our other child is independent. Through 15 years working inside their company. After building their operations from the ground up, managing their most important accounts, and giving up better-paying opportunities to stay loyal to a business that carried our family name. Independent was the word they chose." Vanessa glanced at me from the corner of her eye. The smallest smile crossed her face. I nodded once and looked straight ahead, because I had already suspected something like this was coming. That same evening, my parents' friends and extended family gathered at a restaurant to celebrate Vanessa's new status as the official heir. I was not invited. I found out through the photos. My mother had posted them to her private Facebook page before she passed, and the account was still active. Someone had logged in and posted new ones. The caption read, "Proud of our successor. The future is bright." Successor. Vanessa had not worked a full week at the company in years. She handled the social media pages and occasionally showed up for brand photo shoots. She knew how to make the business look good in pictures. She did not know how it actually worked. I had built half the client systems we used every day. Around midnight, a text came through from her. "Don't be bitter about it. You were never really business-minded anyway. You were always more of an operations person." She said operations like it was a consolation prize. Like keeping an entire company running from the inside was something anyone could do. I did not reply. I set the phone down on the kitchen counter and looked out the window for a long time. 'Cause 3 months before that while reading, something had already changed. And Vanessa had no idea. Let me tell you who I actually was inside that company because the story makes no sense without it. I was the quiet one. I was not in the brochures and I did not post about my work on social media. But I was the reason the business ran smoothly year after year. I handled operations. Every workflow, every vendor relationship, every internal process that kept the company from falling apart during busy seasons, that was mine. I built the client retention system from scratch in year 3, and our renewal rate went from 60% to over 90% in 2 years. I handled vendor negotiations and crisis management. When a major data error nearly cost us our biggest account, I was on the phone until 2 in the morning resolving it. Vanessa handled branding, photos, and social media. She was warm and photogenic and great at making the company seem exciting from the outside. She genuinely cared about the image. But at family dinners, she was always the face. She got the compliments. She got the applause. I got the thank yous that came in the form of more responsibility. There was one client, though, above all others, who had watched closely enough to notice the real difference between us. Growing up in our family had a particular pattern that I did not fully understand until I was an adult. Vanessa received praise. I received responsibility. Those were not the same thing, even though my parents treated them as if they were. When Vanessa wanted to start a small online boutique at 22, my parents funded it without question. When I wanted to attend a business development conference in my mid-20s, I was told to figure out the cost on my own. When Vanessa struggled with her boutique and eventually closed it, it was called a learning experience. When I made a mistake at the company, it became a discussion at dinner about whether I was really suited for the role. They called me self-sufficient. They said it proudly, as though it were the highest compliment they could give. What it actually meant was that they believed I did not need their support the way Vanessa did. so they never gave it. I learned to build without them. I learned to solve problems quietly, to find resources independently, to move forward without waiting for permission or encouragement. They thought they were describing a personality trait when they called me self-sufficient. They did not realize they were describing someone who had spent years building leverage without ever needing to announce it. Company's largest account represented 40% of annual revenue. 40%. Not a minor client, not a mid-tier relationship. A single account that, if removed, would send the entire business into an immediate financial crisis. I had brought them in 7 years before the will reading. I met their CEO, Mr. Osei, at an industry conference. We had a conversation about operational efficiency that lasted nearly 2 hours. I followed up the next day with a detailed proposal I had written that same night in my hotel room. He signed within 3 weeks. Over the 7 years that followed, I handled every crisis, every contract renewal, every escalation, and every strategic pivot that affected their account. Mr. Osei and I had spoken directly, sometimes weekly. He knew my name. He knew my work. He trusted my judgment. He once told me privately, during a call after I had resolved a particularly complicated issue for them, "If you ever leave that company, call me first." I'm serious. At the time, I had laughed it off. I was not planning to leave. Company was my family's. I thought loyalty counted for something. 3 months before the will reading, I stopped believing that. And I had not forgotten what Mr. Osei said. The first sign that something was being arranged without my knowledge came about 8 months before my parents passed. I arrived at the office one Monday to find that a strategy meeting had been scheduled the previous Friday for that same morning. I had not been included on the invite. When I asked the office manager about it, she looked uncomfortable and said she had only followed the instructions she was given. Vanessa was in that meeting. She had driven up the night before to attend. Over the following weeks, the pattern continued. Calls I had always been on suddenly had new attendees. Documents that normally landed in my inbox were being forwarded directly to Vanessa. She started sitting in on vendor calls without explanation. Then one evening, walking past my father's office, I heard him on the phone. The door was halfway open. He said clearly, "She'll take over once everything is finalized." I stood still in the hallway. He was not talking about me. I walked back to my office and closed the door quietly. I sat at my desk for a long time. The next morning, I submitted a formal request for copies of all partnership documents and client contracts to which I was a named party. And I found something very interesting inside them. I had never been given equity in the company. I had known this for years but had never examined what it actually meant in the context of the work I did every day. A salary was not ownership. I understood that. But what I had not fully considered was the question of what I did own. The answer turned out to be more significant than I expected. Every major client contract listed a primary account executive. That was the named individual responsible for the relationship, deliverables, and communication with the client. On the company's largest account, the one representing 40% of revenue, that name was mine. Not my father's name. Not the company's name alone. Mine. My attorney, Ms. Adeyemi, explained what this meant when I brought her the documents. Client relationships, she said, were not company assets the way equipment or inventory were. They were built on personal trust and individual competency. A company could not automatically transfer a client relationship the way it could transfer a building. Client had to consent to who managed them. If a client decided they wanted to follow the person they had worked with, no legal mechanism could force them to stay. I read that sentence twice before I let it settle. I did not confront my parents. I did not send a long message to Vanessa. I did not raise my voice in any meeting or make any kind of scene that could later be used to paint me as unstable or difficult. Instead, I got to work. The first thing I did was update my LinkedIn profile. quietly, carefully, describing my actual responsibilities and accomplishments without naming specific clients or breaking any confidentiality. I simply told the truth about what I had done for the past 15 years. Then I reconnected with former vendors I had built relationships with over the years. Just check-in messages at first, nothing transactional. I registered an LLC under my own name. Process took less than a week. I secured a small shared office space 2 miles from the family company. Month-to-month lease. Enough room for 2 desks and a meeting area. I consulted Ms. Adeyemi twice more. During our second meeting, she reviewed my original employment agreement carefully. There was no non-compete clause. Not a vague one. Not a narrow one. None at all. My parents had never thought to include one because they had never imagined a version of events where I was not a loyal employee for life. They assumed loyalty. They never considered that loyalty had to be earned. 1 week after the will reading, my parents' company sent a company-wide email. The subject line read, "Introducing our new leadership." It announced Vanessa as the official successor and future managing director. It described her vision for the company's next chapter. It included a photograph of her standing in front of the company logo, smiling. I was copied on the email. There was no mention of my role. There was no acknowledgement of my tenure or my contributions. I was simply on the recipient list, like the receptionist and the junior filing clerks. Vanessa replied to the entire company within minutes. So excited to lead our team into the future. Big things coming. Our team. I read that word twice. I had spent 15 years helping build that team. I had hired 3 of the senior staff members personally. I had trained 2 of the account managers who were still there. I had written the onboarding documentation that every new employee received on their first day. And I was reading about our team the same way everyone else was. What I noticed, sitting quietly at my desk, was that the company-wide email had gone to every client contact address as well, which meant Mr. Osei had received it too. I closed my laptop and waited. My phone rang the following morning at 8:47. It was Mr. Osei. I let it ring once more before I answered. "Good morning," I said. "I need to ask you something directly," he said. He did not do small talk when something was on his mind. That was something I had always respected about him. "Of course. I received your company's email yesterday. It says there's new leadership taking over. I didn't see your name anywhere in it. I want to know what's happening." I paused for exactly 1 second. "I wasn't consulted about the transition," I said simply. Silence on his end. A long one. "Then, so you're stepping back?" "That is what the email implies," I said. Another pause. Then his voice changed just slightly into the tone he used when he had made a decision. "I have to be honest with you. My team and I have been with your family's company because of the work you specifically do. The responsiveness, the systems, the way problems get solved before we even notice them. That's been you." He paused once more. "If you ever build something of your own, I want you to call me. And I mean that seriously this time." I wrote nothing down. I did not need to. That sentence changed everything. Vanessa called a formal meeting 3 days after her succession announcement went out. I arrived on time, sat down across from her in the main conference room, and waited. She had brought a printed document and slid it across with both hands, the way people do when they want the gesture to feel official. It was a new role description. My title would remain the same. My salary would remain the same. But my authority had been restructured. Account strategy, vendor negotiations, and client-facing communication would now fall under Vanessa's direct oversight. I would shift into what the document called back-end operational support. In the company I had built operationally from the inside out. In the company where I had personally managed the relationship that kept 40% of revenue flowing every year. I read the document from top to bottom without interrupting. Then I folded it and set it back on the table. I looked at Vanessa. She looked back with that same small expression from the will reading. Expectant. Slightly satisfied. "I'll need a few days to think this over," I said. She nodded and said that was perfectly reasonable. I left the meeting, walked to my car, and drafted my resignation letter on my phone. I submitted my resignation the following Monday morning. It was professional, formal, and completely calm. I had asked Ms. Adeyemi to review it over the weekend. It offered a 4-week transition period and referenced my willingness to support handover of operational documentation. My parents' reaction was immediate. My mother called me within an hour of receiving it. Her voice was tight. "You're being emotional," she said. "You're letting the inheritance upset you into making a bad decision." I said I had thought it through carefully and that this was not impulsive. My father called 20 minutes after that. He said the same thing in different words. I listened to both of them. I thanked them for the call. I told them I hoped we could remain a family regardless of what happened professionally. Then I sat down at my personal laptop and drafted a short, carefully worded email to Mr. Osei. It said, "I wanted to let you know personally that I will be pursuing independent consulting after 4 weeks' notice at the company. It has been a genuine privilege working with your team for 7 years. I am grateful for everything we built together." That was all it said. No pitch. No invitation. Just the truth, delivered directly and without pressure. His response arrived in under an hour. Mr. Osei's reply was 4 sentences long. He thanked me for letting him know personally. He said he appreciated the directness. He asked if I was available for a private call that afternoon. He said it was important. We spoke at 3 o'clock. He opened without preamble. "I'm going to be straightforward with you because you deserve that. When my team joined your family's company 7 years ago, the reason we stayed was you. Not the brand, not the pricing. The relationship was built entirely on your work, your reliability, and your judgment." He paused. "My board has been asking questions since the succession announcement. They want to know who will be managing the account going forward." I waited. "If you launch your own firm and can service our account at the same level, we will transition our contract to you. We are prepared to make that move." I was quiet. He continued, "I don't say this lightly. We'd be leaving a company we've worked with for 7 years. But our loyalty was to the work, and the work was yours." I thanked him. I told him I would confirm my plans within 2 weeks. I already knew what I was going to do. Transitioning them would remove 40% of my parents' annual revenue in a single move. Before I confirmed anything with Mr. Osei, I went back to Ms. Adeyemi. I wanted to be certain. Not just confident, but certain. What I was about to do was significant, and I was not willing to take that step without understanding every legal detail. I laid out the situation. My resignation had been submitted. My LLC was registered. My office was ready. Mr. Osei had expressed clear intent to follow me. I asked her to review everything one final time. She went through it methodically. My employment agreement had no non-compete clause. That meant I was legally free to operate in the same industry and serve the same type of clients immediately after my notice period ended. There was no ownership claim over the client relationships I had managed. I had never signed anything transferring my personal relationships to the company as a business asset. Clients were free to choose who they worked with. No contract between my parents and their clients prevented those clients from moving to a different provider. The move was entirely legal. Ms. Adeyemi looked at me when she finished. "You have no exposure here," she said. I nodded, thanked her, and paid the invoice. Then I called Mr. Osei. 6 weeks after my resignation was submitted, the company received formal written notice from Mr. Osei's organization. They were terminating their contract. The stated reason was strategic realignment. The letter was professional and contained no criticism of the company. But the message was unmistakable to anyone who understood the timeline. 40% of annual revenue was gone in a single document. Vanessa called me that same evening. She was not calm the way she had been in the conference room. Her voice was sharp and fast and filled with the kind of energy that comes from panic trying to sound like anger. "You stole our biggest client," she said. "You went behind our backs and you stole them." I let her finish. "They made a choice," I said. "I didn't instruct them to leave. I told them I was starting my own firm. They decided independently to follow." "That is the same thing." "Legally," I said, "it is not." She said several more things after that. I listened to all of them. Then I told her I hoped the transition would go smoothly for the company and that I wished her success in her new role. I ended the call and sat quietly for a few minutes. That was only the first domino, and the others were already leaning. Within 3 weeks of Mr. Osei's departure, 2 smaller accounts began asking questions. One of them called the office looking for me and was told I was no longer with the company. They found my LinkedIn profile and called my personal cell within the hour. "We wanted to check in," the contact said. "We've been uncertain about the transition." I was honest. I told them I had started my own firm and was happy to explain what working with me directly would look like. I made no promises and applied no pressure. Within 2 weeks, both accounts formally moved their contracts to my new firm. The revenue drop at my parents' company was now accelerating faster than Vanessa had anticipated. She had assumed losing one large account was survivable. She had not accounted for the ripple effect on client confidence across the rest of the portfolio. Word travels in any industry. When a business loses its largest client shortly after a leadership change, remaining clients ask questions about stability. They want to know if the company they trusted is still the same one. My parents called and asked for a family meeting. I agreed to come. I brought nothing to argue with because I had not done anything wrong. I came to listen. The family meeting happened on a Saturday afternoon at the house. My parents sat on one side of the kitchen table. Vanessa sat beside them. I sat across from all three and kept my hands flat on the table. My father spoke first. He told me that what I had done was a betrayal. That I had used my position and my relationships to sabotage the family business after being fairly compensated for 15 years. I let him finish completely. Then my mother said the words I had expected. "We never thought you would hurt us like this." I sat with that sentence for a moment. "I gave 15 years to this company," I said. "I built the operations. I brought in and managed the biggest client you had. And the will described me as independent like it was a dismissal. Vanessa was handed everything. I was handed nothing." Silence. When Vanessa reduced my role to back-end support, I resigned. That was my right. The clients who followed made their own choices. My mother started to speak again. I said, gently but clearly, "I learned to build without support from the people who were supposed to give it. I learned that from you." Nobody said anything for a long time after that. Financial reality was already arriving on their doorstep. Vanessa's first attempt to manage the remaining accounts without me was difficult to watch, even from a distance. The transition documents I had provided during my notice period were thorough. I had done my job professionally right up to the last day. But documents are not the same as knowing. They can tell you what to do. They cannot give you 7 years of context, instinct, and relationship history. Vanessa stepped into the largest remaining account and missed a critical renewal deadline in the first month. Client called the office 3 times before anyone responded with the right information. Staff were overwhelmed. 2 senior account managers resigned within 6 weeks of my departure. One of them came to work for me later. Online reviews began appearing that mentioned slow response times and inconsistent service. In a service business, consistency was everything. Investors who held a minority stake reached out to the board asking for an explanation of the revenue decline. From the outside, a company that had looked stable was showing signs of fracture. From the inside, what was happening was simpler. The person who had made it work was no longer there. And no announcement or ownership document could replace what I had actually built. About 4 months after I left, I attended an industry conference in the city. I had been invited to appear on a panel about operational leadership and client retention in mid-sized firms. Ms. Adeyemi had suggested I consider public speaking as a way to build visibility for my new firm, and I had agreed. The event had around 300 people in attendance. When the moderator introduced the panelists, she described me as the founder of a consulting firm focused on operational strategy and long-term client relationships. She mentioned that my firm had secured a multi-year contract with one of the region's most recognized corporate clients within its first year. Mr. Osei was in the audience. After the panel ended, he walked up to the front of the room and we shook hands. He thanked me publicly in front of a group gathered around the panel table for what he called years of operational excellence. He said his team was grateful for the consistency I had brought to their work. People applauded. I thanked him simply and genuinely. I noticed near the back of the room a woman who looked like Vanessa moving toward the exit. I was not certain it was her, but I recognized the way she moved when she wanted to leave somewhere quickly. 6 months after Mr. Osei's company terminated their contract, the financial damage to my parents' business had become impossible to minimize. They sold the vacation home they had owned for 20 years. The sale was listed publicly, and the timing made the reason clear to anyone who knew the family. They laid off 4 staff members, reducing the company to its smallest headcount in a decade. 2 of the people I had originally hired were among those who received notices. They took out a business loan to cover operational costs during what Vanessa described to family members as a transitional period. The loan came with conditions attached to the company's assets. The inheritance Vanessa had received in the will, the house, the savings, the business shares, was still technically hers. But the value of those shares had declined sharply, and the savings had been redirected to keep the company running. She had inherited the structure. But without its engine, the structure was not worth what it had appeared to be the day the will was read. Meanwhile, my firm was growing. I was not posting about it. I was simply working the same way I had always worked, building something real with my name on the door. Contrast was becoming impossible to ignore. 1 year after I left, I took stock of where things stood. My new firm's revenue had surpassed my old salary by a factor of 4. That number still surprised me when I wrote it down. I had hired 3 people. One was a former senior account manager from my parents' company who had reached out 4 months after I left. She was excellent at her job and had been frustrated by the disorganization following my departure. I was glad to bring her on. We had expanded into 2 neighboring states, bringing on clients in markets where our model translated well and where my existing network had connections. Mr. Osei's company had renewed their contract on a multi-year agreement. We had built a proper service framework around the relationship and were delivering at a level I was genuinely proud of. Not because it impressed people, because it was good work. I sat at my desk one evening after everyone had gone home and realized this was the first time in 15 years that I felt fully in control of what I was building. Nobody had given it to me. No inheritance document. No parental approval. No family vote. I had earned every piece of it. Then my phone rang. It was Vanessa. Vanessa and I had not spoken in several months by the time she called. I answered on the 3rd ring. She was calm, which told me she had thought about the call before making it. There was none of the sharpness from the night she accused me of stealing the client. She sounded measured. She said she had been thinking about the company's situation. She asked if I would be open to a conversation about collaboration. She said perhaps I could consult for the family company and help them stabilize. She framed it as a chance to stay connected to the business our parents had built. I listened without interrupting. When she finished, I asked one clarifying question. What would the arrangement look like in terms of structure and decision-making authority? She paused, then said those details were still being worked out. I told her I appreciated the call and that I could tell it had not been easy to make. I told her I wished her well and hoped she found a path forward that worked. Then I declined. Politely. Without drama. Without a long explanation. I had built something that belonged entirely to me. I had no reason to go back. My father called me on a Sunday evening about 14 months after I had left. He asked if he could come by my office one morning that week. I said yes, and we settled on a time. He arrived on a Thursday. I made us both coffee. We sat across from each other in my meeting room, the room where I now met with clients who had chosen to be there. He was quiet for a moment. He looked around the space. Then he looked at me. "We underestimated you," he said. Those 3 words. I had imagined this moment in different forms on different nights over the years. Usually when I was tired, and the recognition that never came felt like something I carried alone. But sitting across from him in a space I had built entirely through my own effort, the words landed differently than I expected. They were honest. I believed he meant them. But I also understood something I had not known until that exact moment. Acknowledgement was not the same as restoration. He had seen clearly. But what had already been done could not be undone. I thanked him for coming and meant it. Then I walked him to the door and watched him drive away from the office I had built without him. I thought about the will reading often in the months that followed, but differently than I had at first. First, sitting in Mr. Aldridge's office and hearing my parents' words read aloud, the feeling had been something close to shame. Independent as a dismissal. The suggestion that I did not need support because I had always managed without it. But looking at the picture a year later, everything looked different. They had given Vanessa the assets. The house. The savings. The business shares. The official title and the public recognition. She had inherited a structure. But a business is not its structure. It is not the office lease or the name on the sign or the number in a savings account. A business is its relationships, its reputation, and the trust built one interaction at a time over many years. I had built those things. They had never appeared in any document. But they were mine. Vanessa had inherited the company. I had inherited the engine that made it run. When the engine left, what remained was a structure with no power behind it. The full picture of what had actually been passed down, and to whom, was only now becoming visible. And there was one final truth that completed it. Here is what I know now that I did not understand on the day of the will reading. My parents believed they were distributing assets fairly. They believed I was capable enough to build my own future, and in that belief they accidentally gave me the most important thing they could have offered. They gave me no safety net. And because there was no safety net, I had spent 15 years building my own foundation. Skills no one could inherit who had not done the work. Relationships built on trust that no legal document could transfer. A reputation earned through 15 years of showing up and delivering on what I promised. They gave Vanessa the company. The market gave me everything else. She received property and equity. She received a name on a document and a title in an email. She received the visible part of what our parents spent their lives building. I received the invisible part. The part that actually moved. Real inheritance is not what is written in a will. It is the skill you carry in your hands and the trust people extend when no one is watching. It is the relationships that follow you because of who you are. They thought they were leaving me with nothing. They left me with everything that mattered.